Welcome into another episode of Behind the Catch Fence. I'm your host, David Hoffman. So you're looking around, if you're on YouTube, you're looking around, you may see a little bit of a different change of scenery. You got a Boris said nose, Ford Fusion nose here, that's signed on the other side. There's a story behind that, I'll get to that at some point. On my left side, you got a Tony Stewart display case, got die-cast cars, helmet, whatever else. Big Stewart fan for a lot of years, so that's with that. And also wearing, I'm not wearing the BCF polo this time. I felt, since I'm at home, want to show off a little bit of fun, give a little bit of a fun vibe to the video viewers. So wearing a John Force, I believe it's 2002 championship crew neck. I found that off of eBay. Incredible. Since I had him on the show a couple months ago, thought it'd be cool to, get this. He could be back on the show. Nothing, I will not say yes or no yet, but it's, you guys can figure that out for yourselves. It'll be coming out soon. Oops, I already spilled it. Anyway, that'll be up soon. Have another guy coming up this week as well, but today, before I begin, I'd like to give a quick shout out to No Copyright Music on YouTube. They're the ones creating the music that I'm playing. It's obviously no copyright music, so it's free. I'd like to thank you guys for that. With me being a really, really broke college student, I'm grateful for you guys. So go subscribe to them. No copyright music. All right, so on today's show, episode 41, we have another special guest. And if you're on YouTube, you're probably wondering, why am I holding the Dale Earnhardt Jr. 2004 Daytona 500 winner? I mean, look at that thing. That thing is really cool. Got that signed to Watkins Glen a couple years ago. But you're probably wondering, why am I holding it? Well, today on the show, not Dale Jr., but we do have his PR man from the Budweiser 8 Days, Jade Gurss. So Jade, he's done a lot with NASCAR, IndyCar, just motorsports in general. Most recently, he wrote a Checkered Past, Unser Jr. story. That's out. You can get it for $35 on, it's called Octane Press is the publication company. He's written John Andretti's Racer book. He's written a couple Dale Jr. books, including Driver Number 8. Let's see, who else? He also wrote Beast, the story on the 1994 Team Penske winner, Unser Jr. When that beast of a motor, Team Penske found a loophole, and you guys have to go check that out to find the whole story. But Jade Gurss is on the show. We talk about all sorts of things from his remarkable Kansas City Chiefs pulling out a win, even a couple weeks ago against the Bills. I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen that whole game, but we talked about that briefly. We talked about just the Budweiser 8 Days and just the madness around that. I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen the Wilson ball in Dale Earnhardt Jr.'s car from 2001 at Dover when he won that. There's a story about that. Talk about just how Jade got into motorsports, just his background with motorsports and just his books and everything else. So if you love the glory days of NASCAR, if you love just Dale Earnhardt Jr., if you love any type of great storytelling in motorsports, this is the one for you. So stay tuned here in a second. So that's all we have, episode 41. Let's get it rolling. So sit back, relax, grab your favorite drink and snack, maybe a lemonade and, Oreo Cakesters, they're back. Have you guys seen that? Oreo Cakesters are back. So if you find those, I think you have to get them on Amazon or something like that. If you can find some Oreo Cakesters, go and get those. Grab a lemonade, get some Oreo Cakesters, sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode 41 with Jade Gurss.
Or I could go none. How about that? That's a little less exciting.
What's the picture over there? Is that from the 90s?
Yeah, that's from my days at Mercedes-Benz, Formula One and IndyCar. We won the first two races, or the first race of each category. So it's produced in Germany in the days when you couldn't have any tobacco advertising. So you'll notice Marlboro is they just put lines over it. So anyway.
I mean, hey, whatever works.
Yes.
So I noticed on Twitter, I know I'm a big dog person. I noticed that you have two dogs. So, describe their personalities and a little bit about them.
Oh, they're awesome. I don't know what I'd do without them. I just literally walked in from giving them a walk. They're two rescue dogs. One is the smaller one. He was a stray. So I have no idea what his life was like before I got him, but he's a funky little guy that just keeps getting better all the time. He had a lot of anxiety when I got him first, and the second one got as a puppy, rescued from her the litter she was in. The mom gave birth under a large porch, and the woman that owned the dogs was too old to take care of them and couldn't get to them under the porch. So she was a rescue as well, and she's the one that's 100% big blue ball of energy at all times. So anyway,
It's always interesting to see like how the personalities vary with each other.
Oh yeah, don't know how I'd get along without them. They're completely inseparable. They're together all the time. So a lot of fun.
You can't go wrong with dogs, I'll tell you that.
Yes.
So, where did your love originally for motorsports begin? Because you've had a very diverse background just in motorsports in general.
Yeah, I actually know the exact date of my very first race. My mom had gone into labor with my little sister, and they couldn't get a babysitter. So basically, I ended up going to the local dirt track with my aunt and my grandpa. And when you're 3 years old, you have different priorities. So each night before the feature, I got a free snow cone. And so when you're that age, it was like, heck yeah, free snow
Yep.
cone. So so I don't know if it was racing or snow cone initially, but that's how I got hooked on racing, and grew up around dirt tracks and sprint cars and all that. So that's where the obsession was born.
And where did who were some of your heroes back then when you were starting to really get to watch it and everything?
Well, because I would go to the races with my aunt, her all-time favorite was Parnelli Jones. So as a young kid, then that became, he became my hero. And then she would do the race reports for the local dirt track for National Speed Sport News. So as a young kid, I just was used to going to the pits after races and interviewing the winners, and she would interview and I would get autographs. And so I think the die was cast at that point that I would in some way write about racing and all of that. So that's how that got started, or how all the interests that I still have way too many years later still persists.
So I know you went to a Washburn University for communications, like in broadcasting. Is that your initial goal with that? Or
yeah, broadcast production. I loved racing. I loved music. I played in bands, and I really didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up, and that still applies now. I'm still not quite sure what I want to be when I grow up, but I got a broadcast degree, and then they built Heartland Park Topeka, which was a giant road course / drag strip in my hometown. And my little video company got hired to cover some races. And, a year later, I got hired to work there. And that's what kind of got the ball rolling, or my first actual paid gig in motorsports was working for the local track.
And kind of what led you to end up going into public relations then?
That was purely by accident, honestly. I had mentioned I had covered some races with a small crew that I worked with. Sorry, you're hearing a couple of the dogs in the background. And it's a long story, but we did a job that ended up getting the existing general manager. He won a bet. And so I was brought in and interviewed and was hired as a PR assistant, which I really didn't have PR background. But about a week later, the guy who hired me got fired. And I thought, man, I've got my dream job, and now I'm going to be out of my ass. And they hired a new general manager. He made us all re-interview for our jobs. And there was some conflict between he and the existing director of public relations. So suddenly that guy is out on his ear, and now I'm head of public relations 1 week into my career. And the guy that kept me around is still my mentor to this day, decades later. He had a background in as a sports editor of a newspaper. So he liked me because I was young and I didn't have a lot of bad habits. He could really kind of coach me and teach me the way he wanted it to be, which has played out, beautifully for me. And he was really such a good mentor that since then I've really made a distinct effort to do all I can to help other young people that want to get started, whether it's in racing or anything else. So I'm always trying to do what I can to sort of pay back the universe for the help that he gave me in guiding me toward where I'm at today. So it was the right place at the right time, which has kind of been my career all along. Having good opportunities at the right time, but at the same time working my butt off to make sure I took advantage of those lucky breaks.
And I know, well, you mentioned you didn't really have a background in PR before. Were you able to take anything from broadcasting in the PR, or was it kind of you had to learn everything from scratch?
Yes and no. I'd been a writer. I'd written for the school newspaper in high school and then college. So it was not that I was not a decent writer, but I had never studied PR. So I had to learn the techniques of doing a proper PR news release and things of that nature. And, so through the years in writing thousands of those, I really learned to be very succinct, to tell the story in the most direct, most compelling way with, kind of the fewest words possible. And so that kind of training really has helped me once I, started writing books and things. So it was just, even at my advanced age, I'm still learning all the time. So it's always a chance to improve myself or improve my writing, no matter what.
You mentioned writing. What does the process look like just when you sit down with the drivers and just crafting and writing out, and putting everything out on the paper?
Yeah, a typical PR program. I was Dale Earnhardt Jr.'s PR rep for 8 years in the Budweiser era. So he and I would always talk on a particular race weekend about the upcoming race, so that come Monday morning after the existing race has ended, I'm already prepared and have a news release ready to go previewing that upcoming week's racing. Part of my goal was always to be the first one to have the preview come out, because you're able to I don't want to say set the narrative, but if you're able to write a compelling piece previewing what's to come, it sort of prompts journalists or the media. It may prompt ideas of them to write a feature or something like that. So it's always been very critical for me to understand the timing of these things, and being consistently the first out each given week with a race preview. And that really continued through my PR career, is that racing takes place for everyone in the industry in what I call real time, in the sense that the race is scheduled at noon Sunday, and that green flag is going to happen whether you're ready or not. So you can't sort of mess around or say, you know what, I'll do it next week. No, no, that race is going to take off at 12 noon on Sunday, and that green flag falls whether you're ready or not. So you better be ready. So that really, even with my books, has been kind of a big influence on how I look at it or how I approach it, in the sense that, it's a very time sensitive industry, whether you're writing news releases or, if you're a mechanic working on a car. No, you can't take a day off. That car's got to be ready to go when practice starts on Friday or, whenever on that given week. So it's really something that has kind of driven me. And I've been lucky to even give speeches to other businesses and things like that. And so that's one of the topics I like to talk about, is the sense of racing being in absolute time. It's absolutely going to start at 1 o'clock on Sunday, whether you're ready for it or not. So you better be ready.
Yeah. And we'll get back to everything, your time with Dale Jr. But I wanted to kind of touch upon, your latest book, A Checkered Past with Unser Jr. Just tell us a little bit about the book, and then, why any fan of motorsports should go and read it.
Well, it came about. I had just finished in the midst of the pandemic. I had just finished the book Racer with John Andretti. Sadly, John had passed away in the process, which was a rough emotional piece of that book. And I had just finished, and it turns out that the Andretti family attorney happens to be Al Jr.'s attorney. So I got a call saying, would you speak with Al? He's interested in doing a book. And honestly, I was just emotionally, I was spent, but I couldn't say no. It was just too good of an opportunity. And I had worked with Al in the past. My book Beast obviously was about the 94 Indy 500 that Al won. But even before that, in the 90s, when he was with Roger Penske and the Marlboro team Penske, they ran Mercedes Ilmor engines, and I worked for Ilmor and Mercedes through the 90s. So we had a good history. He and I sat down, and immediately he said, I want to be open. I want to be honest. I want to share everything. I want others to learn from the struggles that I've had and the difficulties that I've been through. So I really responded to that, because I don't know that I would have been interested otherwise. I have written books where, the hero building is a part of it. I'm not going to lie. That's part of telling someone's story, is you emphasize the heroic elements, whereas Al had those heroic elements, but also a very rough life dealing with drug and alcohol issues, substance abuse issues. And so we jumped in feet first. Like I say, that very first meeting he and I had, he shared a shocking story with me about him attempting suicide. And he said, that's got to be the opening of the book. And so if you've read the book, you know that opening segment is just chilling, where he describes holding this gun in his hand and contemplating suicide. And I thought, oh, this is going to be great. I have to be a part of this. I have to take on this challenge of telling this story. And so the fact that he's thrilled with the result, and that so far people have really responded, that it's sold well, and the response has been very positive, is really, really, really satisfying to me to see that kind of response.
And what's kind of, with any book that you've written, what do you find to be like the most enjoyable aspect of it?
It's interesting. Athletes and musicians and people in other categories call it flow. When you're in the flow of the game, it's when you just sort of, instinct takes over. You're not thinking, you're not worried about every move. You're flowing instinctually, and you're playing at your peak of emotion and ability. And when I'm writing, every so often I'll get into that flow where it just seems effortless, and I'll kind of realize, oh, it's 10:30 at night and I haven't eaten dinner. It's hard to describe, and it's not something you can just sort of force yourself into, but it's when I feel like I do my best work. And usually on a typical book, there may be 3 or 4 days when I sort of get to that point, but when I do, it's a wonderful feeling.
I feel like in a way, I know I felt something similar with that, whether like editing something or putting something together, it's kind of like everything starts to just flow at once, and you feel like that passion kind of burning through you in a way, and you're like, oh gosh, I forgot, I haven't eaten yet. Like,
being skilled at something is helpful, because on the days when you're not feeling that, you must have the sort of the background or the foundation to be able to edit something even when you're not feeling it. And writing for me is a lot like that. There are days when I'd rather be anywhere else, but you're able to kind of still produce what you need to, and hopefully go back and then edit those into something a little more palatable. But yeah, you hit it on the head. It's being comfortable enough or confident enough in whatever your role, whatever that is, racing, riding, whatever it is, that you can hit that essence of flow. But if you're not feeling it, you can still do your job professionally and do it well. So it's again, it's part of writing a book that I love.
Kind of going with the flow aspect of things. When
Sure.
you first started working with Dale Earnhardt Jr., what were some of the challenges just that you had to overcome to be able to get into that rhythm, that flow of, because you guys were able to do so much, incredible, things together?
Yeah. It's hard to describe. I was at the right place at the right time. Anheuser-Busch was my client. Budweiser was a brilliant sponsor. They supported us fully. I've dealt with some other sponsors that are so risk averse, or they're so uptight about everything that it makes everything kind of drudgery. But Budweiser kind of let us get after it. And it was a whirlwind from the start. Starting his career with his famous name, there was always attention upon him. There was always pressure to perform, for him, for me, for the race team. But 7 races into his career, he ends up winning at Texas. Then he wins the All-Star race, and this junior mania just went berserk. And so you didn't really even have time to think about things. You were just sort of reacting and keeping up with things. Rolling Stone calls, they want to do a feature. Oh my God. We meet people from MTV. Suddenly he's on MTV, originally a show called True Life. Then they said, hey, do you want to do MTV Cribs? I mean, it was a perfect intersection of the right young man with a great personality, very smart young man. And NASCAR at that point was on its upswing. There was just every piece fell into place. And as hard as I've worked with other clients and other drivers, you can't sort of replicate that. You do your best, but sometimes all the pieces fit, and it just you're just lucky to hang on and try not to fall off as you're zooming through space.
Whoa, now before we continue on with this incredible episode with Jade Gurss, we have a little bit of a public service announcement. You guys should go check out Racer Collect. Now, Racer Collect, you're probably wondering, what is that? What is Racer Collect? Sounds cool. Basically, if you go to www.racercollect.com, they have all of your merchandise, your motorsports merchandise needs, from race-used items to just, to die-cast, you name it, paintings, they have it. Basically, at Racer Collect, you're able to get race-used memorabilia straight from the driver themselves. For instance, you can get race-used memorabilia from Pippa Mann, Connor Daly, James Hinchcliffe, and all sorts of other drivers as they continue to partner up. And for Racer Collect, it's such a great place because it's authentic, it's going to come straight from the drivers. You can have it personally hand-signed. For instance, this James Hinchcliffe race-used fire suit, you can have it. You can have a personal inscription on it if you want to, have it directly signed by James Hinchcliffe, sent from his house all the way over to you. It's a great deal. And you're able to really just know that, hey, this is coming from a great source. And I know I'm getting authentic race-used memorabilia. So go check them out on Instagram and Twitter. That'll be down below here at Racer Collect. And if you have any other questions, make sure to comment below, but make sure to go check them out. All right, now back to episode 41 with Jade Gurss.
And just, I remember listening to the Dale Jr. download when that came out. I remember,
Yes.
you mentioned how you kind of had to push Junior out of his comfort zone a little bit with some of these opportunities. How did you see, Dale grow as a person through that?
That's fascinating as well. He had a father that everyone knows as the Intimidator, and he was the Intimidator pretty much 24/7. So Dale had this father that kind of was his hero, was his boss. His dad owned the race team. His dad basically ran his life, or his life was determined sort of by his father. So Dale Jr. was kind of shy in the sense of not trusting himself completely, to trust himself, to break out of just doing it like his dad did. And so he and I became pretty close his rookie year. And so I saw a lot of that in him. And then sadly, in 2001, when his father was killed, suddenly the guy that he thought was Superman was gone. And so part of my role was to help him learn to trust himself, or learn to have the confidence to do new things. It wasn't always easy. If you watch the Dale Jr. downloads, where we talked about, he was terrified of going on the MTV Music Video Awards because he didn't want to look bad by wearing a suit from a store in Morrisville, North Carolina. He just had these insecurities. And so sometimes I'd have to push a little harder than other times. But once he would agree to do something, once we got into it, then he would eventually relax and enjoy it. The MTV Awards, he was so nervous. I don't think he enjoyed it until the next day, when all of his buddies called and said, "Dude, you were great." And suddenly I think he finally realized how cool it was what he had just done. But it makes me really proud to see that those elements that were always within him are now really thriving. Really great time with him just last week, getting into the NASCAR Hall of Fame. Really makes me proud to see him flourish and those anxieties go away as he's become just even more wonderful human.
You mentioned the Hall of Fame. Just what was it like to seeing him up on stage, and as you were someone who was around him so much, and to be able to say, wow, he accomplished probably the biggest thing in NASCAR.
Yeah, well, it like I say, I was so proud. I kind of feel like an older brother in some weird way, and so it was great for me personally to see it. I was thrilled for him and his family, because I know that it means so much to him. But I was mostly proud because as good as he was behind the wheel, I think this Hall of Fame thing is more about who he is as a human and what he's meant to the sport. Again, we had some great victories and some amazing drives, and I could list 10 or 12 off the top of my head that were amazing on-track moments. But honestly, the whole Hall of Fame thing for me is about the person that he is, the way he handled the adversity of his father's death, and the way he just handled so much pressure with such, I don't want to say ease, because it was difficult, but with such humility, and just the way he conducts himself. That to me personally is what I'm most proud of for him and for his family.
And you mentioned this with, it just seems like it's been great, the past couple of years, especially with him being on NBC, doing, the podcast and everything. It's just cool to see, like, because you can see his personality, you can see how much passion he has for the sport. much
Oh
passion he
yeah.
has just talking about it. It's just been great to just see him really just like, kind of grow into like this, person that you've seen for years at this point.
Yeah. Well, and that's what was funny. I sent a tweet the night after his Hall of Fame speech that the weird thing for me was him up there talking about his career and these people was just like in the old days when he and I would sit on his bus at a race weekend and laugh and talk about racing and all that. He's the same way on NBC. It's just him sitting with his buddies, enjoying the race and talking about it. That I'm biased, but I find it very entertaining. It's just him and his buddies, sharing their joy of this sport. So I think that really comes through on air. That's really how he is on or off the camera.
And I know you mentioned a little bit earlier, just after in 2001 Daytona, the following July race. What was that whole
Yeah.
vibe leading up to that? Because I'm sure that had to be a lot of just pressure, whether it's media or just anyone else.
Yeah. Well, it was insane. Honestly, it was insane from the moment his dad passed away, leading up to that. So you had this sort of 3 or 4 month buildup, I guess. And he really was smart in that he decided he didn't want to just show up at the racetrack cold. He wanted to deal with it with his dad's death beforehand. So in those days, there was always a week off before the July race at Daytona. So he rented a condominium and he and some of his buddies went down there and spent the week mostly hanging out and drinking beer and all of that. But he literally drove to the track with a couple of his friends, drove to turn 4, went up and sat with his back against the wall there on the turn 4 banking and kind of came, I don't want to say came to terms, that I'm struggling to describe the right words, but he kind of dealt with it directly while the track was quiet, while he could just be there with his thoughts. And then once we arrived for the actual race weekend, we had kind of told the media, look, we'll do the typical, the post-qualifying interviews and things like that, but we're not going to do any other interviews, or he's not going to do in-depth news conference about his father. This is a very private, personal thing. And everybody was pretty respectful for the most part. And practice began, and he knew right away that car was fast. The Budweiser crew, his crew chief, Tony Uri Sr., was his uncle. His cousin, Tony Jr., was the crew chief. They had spent the end of every day after the Big E's death massaging, polishing, working on that race car. It was really an obsession for them. And when that car got out on track in July, I mean, it was a rocket. And it was kind of funny because they all knew it and they all said, all right, let's be calm. Let's not get too excited here. We know we've got a great car. We know we've got a car that could win. And so it was very kind of low-key optimism. And of course, then that night was just, just insane. The crowd and I've laughed about this. Part of my role as PR guy I was in charge of Victory Lane, of the hat dance and orchestrating all of that. So he wins the race and I run to Victory Lane there at Daytona, and I can't figure out where in the world everyone's gone. And then I realized he had spun through the grass, and he and Michael Waltrip were celebrating. And it's funny because he and I had talked about that he hated winning a cup race and then sort of being forced to come to Victory Lane and go through this corporate, thing. Oh, you can't get out of the car right away. You got to wait. You got to do your TV interview. It was so very scripted and regulated. that he had figured it out. He wasn't going to come to victory lane first. He was going to spin through the grass, celebrate it with the fans, celebrate it with the team. He didn't tell any of us because, like I say, I was back at victory lane wondering where in the hell everybody was at. But it was something that he had thought about. And so that whole scene out there on the grass after the win was something that he had really thought long and hard about. So it's still pretty emotional for me today, and I think for him and a lot of people too, it was really a great moment.
I know every time I see like the replay of the last couple of laps, it always just gives me chills, just how it all went down. What were your emotions when you thought, to go from sixth to first? Like, what were your emotions during that whole little run?
It was amazing. He had fresher tires than everyone. That's why he had dropped back. He had run at the front most of the night. And then they decided late that their best shot was to take tires. I can't remember how many laps were left there when the thing restarted, but we knew he had fresh tires. Michael Waltrip was in the mix. I think initially on the restart was ahead of him. But once Michael fell in behind Dale Jr., it was basically a reverse of what had happened at the Daytona 500, where the two of them had worked well together, with Michael winning, Dale Jr. second. Now suddenly that was reversed, and it's almost like you knew that he had his his bodyguard behind him to help get him across the finish line. So yeah, those of us in the pits, it's just this unbearable tension, those final laps, because you're just, as someone in the pit lane, you can't do anything. It's in his hands. So you're just, pulling him through every corner, every moment. So pretty intense time frame there at the end of that race.
I know later on in 2001, he won at Dover with the Wilson ball from Castaway in the car. What was the backstory behind that? I've always wondered that.
Well, I will actually take credit for that one. The days after his father passed were very rough for him. And there were times when it was a very lonely time for him. He'd sit in his bus on race weekends, and he was a late night guy, and he'd watch movies. And he got hooked on the Tom Hanks movie, Castaway. And Tom is on this island stranded, and he develops this weird relationship with Wilson, the volleyball. And Junior he kind of thought that was cool, or he identified with that. He's always been a big Tom Hanks fan too. So when 9/11 happened, and again, we had already been through hell with Dale Sr.'s death, and then 9/11, everyone in the country was feeling adrift and all of that. And I don't know what sparked it, but we got to Dover, and I got there, and I just had this idea. So I went to like a local Walmart or somewhere and got a volleyball and a red Sharpie, and so created a Wilson. And then Saturday before the race, before the last practice, I'd shown the team, and we wanted it to be a secret, but they said, let's stuff it in his helmet. So when he gets in the car, suddenly there's this volleyball. So he laughed his ass off, and we all had a good laugh. And then one of the crew guys had the idea of taking zip ties and strapping the volleyball down on the floor of the car. So during the race, Junior didn't know it was there until his cousin told him, look on the floor behind you or something. And so it was just this fun little idea that kind of grew and grew. And in fact, it grew so big, Budweiser politely suggested we no longer bring Wilson to the track, because the brand Wilson was getting more attention than the brand Budweiser at that time. So we politely put it in the kind of the museum there that was at DEI. But yeah, the whole Wilson thing was kind of a fun. it was like a relief valve for us, something fun to take some stress off. And, and of course, you never can script the fact that he's going to win the race and take that giant American flag around the track afterwards. So I don't know, some of that stuff, if you were to write or script it for a movie, people would say, well, that's too corny. That would never happen. But it really did happen. So quite a time.
So I know, I guess my question would be, with the Bud 8 days, it seems like you guys had so much fun. You had so many great opportunities, that you're able to take advantage of. Just looking back on it, what do you feel you really enjoyed the most about those times? Where NASCAR was number one on its, on its at its peak, and with Junior and everything.
Well, I've already said it in the sense that Budweiser was very encouraging. We were not hampered by a risk-averse sponsor. NASCAR had a new TV deal that year, so the TV ratings were going up. The loss of Dale, suddenly the sport needed a new hero. All of that fell into place, and MTV fell in love with them. And I mentioned Rolling Stone magazine. He did the Playboy interview. Again, from Budweiser's standpoint, that was their target audience. They wanted to reach the young men who read Playboy or read Rolling Stone, or wanted to identify with an athlete that was more rock and roll than he was country. So it was just this confluence of things that came together. And for me, selfishly, personally, I have a music background, so the MTV stuff, the Rolling Stone stuff, for me was a big thrill, and so I was able to use my background in music to kind of help further all of that. It just everything fit together. You couldn't sort of force it to happen. It just happened in the way that it should have, and luckily we were just there and hopefully smart enough to play it right and to take advantage of it in the most positive way. We also looked at it long term. He had a long-term contract with Budweiser, and my PR role, I had a long-term contract. So I wasn't terrified of trying to get as much coverage right away. I didn't have that fear that if I don't get coverage every day, that I was, in danger. So it allowed us to think more long-term. It allowed us to plan further ahead. It allowed us to take advantage of certain things, but also saying no to a lot of things that wouldn't have fit that long-term plan. So again, all those pieces just seem to really dovetail to make it all work.
Do you feel that was kind of the, I guess, the not script, but like kind of the mold of, when a media outlet would reach out to you and, ask for a feature or an interview? Like, would you talk with Dale about that before, kind of accepting one or declining?
Yes and no. You kind of have different levels, right? So you knew even before his very first Cup race that with his name alone, there's going to be a lot of interest. There's going to be a lot of media coverage among the NASCAR media, among the motorsports media. So it's not that we didn't care about that, but it was strong enough there that it allowed us to look outside of that. We could take a risk by, like I say, Playboy interview at that time. Again, we're talking 20 some years ago. Playboy was very influential in the sense that young people who drank Budweiser also read Playboy. So you had this mix of elements that allowed us to reach out to that and to take advantage of it. Getting him on the Tonight Show, that sort of thing, could never have happened without all those other pieces building up to it. And so that was the luxury we had, was that, we had the name recognition. And another thing that was funny, even if people never read the Rolling Stone articles or the Playboy, or even if they never saw him on MTV, the fact that there was so much publicity about those things, it only enhanced his image more. And so I found that very fascinating. And now I tell young people, never fail to celebrate your success. Don't just be happy to get a feature story in, Auto Week magazine. Promote the daylights out of Auto Week magazine so that, even if someone doesn't read it, they're like, wow, I heard he was in, Auto Week, or he was in USA Today, that sort of thing. We promoted the heck out of all that just to enhance that sort of image that, this is the guy that you need to talk to if you're talking NASCAR. So that's something I try to encourage people. It's a little different now in the sense that the internet has sort of democratized things. There are fewer massive appearances or massive news outlets that are big individually, but you can develop a series of them across the board and enhance a sponsor's image or a driver's image or whatever. Those sort of elements still apply to to young PR folk or young media folk that are out there today. Never fail to celebrate and promote your successes.
I've always been a very big fan of, like the early 2000s of, NASCAR racing. I'd always found myself, I still to this day wind up watching old races from 2001 or, anything of that nature. I'm a big junkie of that. But, I've always wondered what was the vibe back then of just, being at the racetrack, let's say, the Sharpie 500 or something like that at Bristol. How special was that feeling?
Well, the Bristol night race, it's kind of one in its own. It just kind of had an energy all its own. And so that was always amazing and always intense. And the crowds were just insane. You're really in a big bowl. And the fans are right on the track, and the noise just echoes and reverbs inside of that thing. So it was kind of an entity of its own. But each race, I had mentioned earlier that it was the first year of the new TV deal, where at that time, Fox was the first half and NBC was the second half, kind of like it is now. So the ratings were higher than ever. So within the garage, there was just such a sense of optimism and such a sense that, man, this is a rising tide for all of us. Weirdly, Dale's death was an insane setback to all of us. Emotionally, it was horrible, but from a standpoint of shining a bigger spotlight on NASCAR, it played that role. It really forced people who had not considered NASCAR as a sport to take a look and say, wow, what is this? Why is Dale Earnhardt on the cover of Time magazine and People magazine and the New York Times and all of this? It was a time that for a lot of us in the sport, whether you were with Budweiser or whether if you were 30th in points, it was a time where it was really an exciting time for everyone. Good business time. It just things were really rolling along.
And the last couple of questions, kind of going with that. How have you seen, I guess, American motorsports like NASCAR, IndyCar be able to grow the past couple of seasons?
Yeah, it's been fascinating. Again, I'm spoiled in the sense that I'm old enough to have been around and seen the ebbs and flows throughout the years, and it is always kind of an ebb and flow. I think NASCAR, in a sense, has had, there's always a change in the guard, which, again, in every sport, there's always that turnover. NASCAR went through a period where all of the guards were out of the sport within a very short time frame. And it's taken a while to reestablish the new guard or the young guns or however you want to put it. So I think that was just inherent with Tony Stewart, Jeff Gordon, Dale Jr., Jimmy Johnson, Carl Edwards, like all these leading names suddenly weren't there. And so that's been fascinating. Honestly, my background is more in open wheel. So I was there in the glory days before the ugly split, when it was massive and things were great and life was good. Then the split just killed it all. And it's only recently in the past couple of years where IndyCar has seen this sort of resurgence. And it's due to great racing, great competition, but also really good personalities. You've got a lot of guys that are incredibly talented, that are incredibly likable drivers in IndyCar. And for me, again, as a fan, as much as anything, I can't wait for each race because you're not sure who's going to win. It's always something exciting and new coming along. And so for me, the optimism for open wheel in this country is great. We've seen F1 have this amazing surge of interest. People say it's all Netflix, which I agree, that's brilliantly done, but it's just, again, a confluence of very likable young athletes that are brilliant at what they do, great personalities. We used to laugh about Dale Jr. about, the guys want to have a drink with him and the girls really want to have a drink with him as well. And that's really what I'm seeing in IndyCar and F1, or a lot of these personalities really appealing to a wide array of people. So I don't know. I'm excited. I'm optimistic. I think it's going to be a growth curve continuing here moving forward.
You mentioned with, almost done here.
That's all right.
Don't want to make you miss your tennis.
No, we're good. We're good.
Awesome.
I'll let you know if that comes close.
But you mentioned with like personalities within the sport. I know I kind of grew away from NASCAR a little bit, after, I was a big Tony Stewart fan at the time when all those guys started to retire. NASCAR, I was kind of looking around, and IndyCar kind of sparked my interest in, to see all those personalities within, both sides. It's just really cool to be able to see that. And, they're just so likable, like you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's exciting. Again, I'm biased. I was with Mazda for a few years as a huge part of this Mazda Road to Indy, now just Road to Indy, and it gave IndyCar a very natural ladder system where you kind of see, I use the example of Pato O'Ward being one of my favorites. He showed up at age 15, and it was like, wow, this kid he's fast, he's likable, he's got a great personality. And so you saw him develop for 3 or 4 years, and suddenly he hits the scene and, and just comes out blazing. And I think the same with NASCAR. You're now seeing the lower categories starting to produce drivers to sort of take over what had been missing. And I think it's important to have those personalities. And at the end of the day, it really comes down to storytelling. Whether I'm doing PR or I'm trying to do a feature story on video, or if I'm writing a book, it's all about telling a compelling human story. And I think that's what really drives a lot of the fan engagement, is telling good stories, telling them well, and making people care about who's on track or who's in that car versus who's in that car. I think that's a huge part of how I approach it. And hopefully that's a huge part in what will continue to drive growth in the future.
And if you had 5 minutes to give your younger self a advice during, like, let's say the Budweiser
Yeah.
game, what would you say to him?
Probably to enjoy it more. And it's great. And looking back, it's all wonderful. But at the time, I worked 7 days a week for 5 or 6 years before I was smart enough to hire someone to work with me. And I'm not complaining, but at the time, it's hard to appreciate how great you've got it when you're just sort of, I laugh that I tell people I had a full head of hair when I started working with Dale Jr. And that's not really true, but it just, the stresses, the travel, it is very much a young person's sport. And I think I took it so seriously that I didn't always appreciate the fun at that moment. Looking back now, I guess I can, but it just, it was just a wonderful time with Dale Jr. And I've loved everything I've done before and since, but it's going to be tough in the rest of my life to match anything of that level of intensity and excitement and drama day by day by day.
A final question from me. I'll be interviewing James Hinchcliffe next week on the show, so I'd like to ask you, is there any burning question that you'd comes to mind that you'd like to ask him?
He is one of my favorite human beings. I actually met his father before I met James, and I told his father that I had worked with Greg Moore when I was with Mercedes. So my very first meeting with James was him saying, "Did you really know Greg Moore?" And so he and I kind of bonded on that. What would I want to ask James? He's gonna kill it on TV, and I'm trying to think of what would I ask him about? What is his most valuable lesson inside the race car that he's going to be able to share with us as fans on TV when we're watching this year and beyond?
I really like that. Yeah, because he can very, very, very easily describe things so well, and yeah, I think he'll be great. Like that. I'm gonna make sure to ask him that next week, and I'll post that and tag in or something.
I loved my time with James. We talk about anything other than racing. Usually, we talk about comedy and movies, and he's just a wonderful human being. So I wish you well interviewing. I'm sure he'll be a delight to talk to.
He's always a lot of fun, but I appreciate all your time, Jade.
Sure.
I'll be honest, I didn't really know who you were before the Dale Jr. download, but then I searched up a lot. I'm going to start reading the books, and you have incredible answers, and you've done so much, and I'm just grateful that you accepted to interview.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I tell you that 90 minutes that I was there with Dale and his co-host Mike, who I had brought in, I had hired him, was just amazing and great fun. And that's the thing. I want to be able to share my passion for the sport and tell great stories and help others tell great stories. So it's been a grand time since being on his show.
And hopefully tennis goes well tonight.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. But thank you again for all your time, and
Great.
I'll be posting some videos here soon.
Great, thank you, David. Let me know. I'll promote it as best I can.
I appreciate that. You have a good day.
Okay.
Man.
All right. You too. Take care.
You too.
We'll see you.
Thank you guys for listening to episode 41 with Jade Gurss. Jade, he had so much incredible insight, and you could just tell from every single word, every sentence, just how much his time with Dale Jr. meant to him, just how much, his passion for motorsports just breathes just through him in every single sentence. And it was just such a joy to be able to get to know him, get to talk to him, talk about his books, all sorts of things from the MTV Music Awards with Dale Jr. and how nervous he was and all that other stuff. So for Jade, I really appreciate him coming on the show, and thank you, Jade, once again. For taking the time. It was a lot of fun, and can't wait to maybe get him back on the show here soon. But That is all the time that we do have today on this episode 41. Episode 42 with a special guest, as you guys probably saw that. Towards the end of the interview, James Hinchcliffe, the mayor of Hinchtown, who was in IndyCar as a full-time driver. Now he's moving over to NBC, be a driver analyst. So, yeah, we're gonna have him on the show here in a couple days, and it's gonna be a lot of fun, and it's just gonna be incredible. So you guys should look out for that. And I'm David Hoffman saying so long from the man cave, and I'll catch you guys later from behind the catch fence.